Hello, this is the Green Corn Rebellion Show. I'm Gregory Harden II, and today I am here with my friend Collin Walke, who is a state representative from District 87 in the Oklahoma House of Representatives. He represents a part of Northwest Oklahoma City.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Stop what you're doing. Okay. If you like this video and you like the other content on my channel, please hit the like button on this video. Also, go hit subscribe like right now. And also, when you hit subscribe, click the bell so you can get notifications whenever I put out a new video. So, thanks. All right, enjoy the rest of the video.
How are you doing today?
Doing great, Gregory. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. What's going on this session? Can you give me a little bit of a recap of some of the lowlights and maybe some highlights of what's gone on so far in the legislature?
Yeah, so generally speaking, it's been a weird session. It started off a lot slower than the normal. We missed about 2 weeks worth of committee work. So I was afraid that our deadline weeks were going to be really bad, but they weren't all that bad. Obviously, low lights. We saw Representative Stearman's abortion bill go through. Highlights, we saw Senate President Pro Tem Treat's educational voucher bill die. So that was a big highlight. As you and I were kind of talking offline about, I really feel like this session, while there were still plenty of bad bills, there were far fewer than usual, which has been surprising to me.
That's good. Would you like to talk about the cockfighting bill?
Oh yeah,
and the reasoning for that?
So we were able to kill a cockfighting bill, actually, and what the bill said is by state question we made it a felony, and this would send it from a felony back down to a misdemeanor. And so it was authored by Representative Humphreys. And it was interesting because they were making an argument that, first of all, it was criminal justice reform because you're taking it from a felony down to a misdemeanor. Secondly, they were making the argument that, and I don't know if this is true, but they were suggesting that Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, the surrounding states have it as a misdemeanor as well. So we'd be in line with them. And then finally, I guess they're not actually doing the cockfighting, but they're raising these roosters and then shipping them overseas for cockfighting. So I guess it's part of a business model. In any event, we were able to kill that bill. In fact, Representative Munson was the one that killed that bill by putting an amendment on it that pushed it over the deadline so it couldn't be heard.
That's wild. I don't understand why he maybe Humphreys needs to be investigated for something, because if you're willing to author that type of a bill for something that specific,
yeah, well,
it seems a little suspect because because wasn't the cockfighting making it a felony, that was something that was voted on 2002, right? Because I think that was on the ballot the same year Brett Henry got elected, I think.
Oh, well, I did not know that little fact. You know your history better than I do. But yes, I would imagine, I think that's around the time period when it got voted on.
Yeah, because I remember that. I think some people say, what was it someone said? Heard someone said that Brett Henry got elected because of cockfighting, and I was like, oh really? And I was like, I don't know if that works out that way, but sure. But no, but yeah, that's interesting. So could you talk about some of the bills that you proposed this session and if any of them are still alive?
Yeah, actually, I had 4 bills that I passed out of the House with a cumulative vote total of 345 yes votes and only 15 no votes.
Okay.
And there were some pretty substantive pieces of legislation, so I was pretty impressed with that record. So the first bill is a mental health bill, and it came out of the interim study that I did with Representative Randleman. And what it does is so right now, if a guardian, if a ward is out there on the streets, is homeless but has mental health issues and has been ordered to inpatient facility, and somebody has guardianship over that ward. Well, that guardian can't call the cops right now and say, hey, go pick up the ward and take her to this inpatient facility. And the only time the cops can pick up that person is if they pose a threat of harm to themselves or others. So what my bill says is no, the guardian can now apply to the court. And so long as the officer observes certain characteristics of the individual, for example, they look malnourished, haven't been with shelter for a while, those sorts of things, they're able to then transport that individual to the facility. So they can get a court order directing law enforcement to transport that person. And that came out as a suggestion from the interim study. Another state had done it, and so I just borrowed their language. The next bill is an anti-government graft bill. And this one says that if you've worked on a campaign, then you are not allowed to have a state contract because there's concerns about state contracts being awarded by virtue of who you know, not what you know. And, I think we need to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. Then obviously my Computer Data Privacy Act, which I was happy to see pass again this year with overwhelming numbers. Companies were still out there lobbying against it up until the day it was heard. And so hopefully now with 2 bills live in the Senate, one of them will get heard. We'll see. And then my fourth one, is for courtroom interpreters. Because right now you have to pay for a courtroom interpreter in advance if you need one, et cetera. This one actually pays for courtroom interpreters out of general revenue funds so that litigants, people in the criminal justice system, they're not the ones paying for the courtroom interpreters. So it's an access to justice issue.
It's good. Okay. Yeah, I was watching the interview that we did last year, and you talked about your data privacy bill, and I wanted to know if it had gotten passed or anything, because I didn't keep up with it last year. So
Yeah,
you said that it's currently in the Senate right now, or?
Yeah, so it passed last year and went to the Senate and didn't get heard, but because our sessions are 2 terms, it was still alive for this session. So HB 1602 from last session is in the Senate, Judiciary waiting to be heard, and then 2969 is waiting for assignment into the Senate.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So let's see. So what other things are you hoping to see or thinking might happen later this session?
Well, as you know, Gregory, bills aren't dead out there until the end of session. And what I mean by that is Senator Treat's educational savings accounts bill. I think that's going to probably rear its head again some way, somehow. Governor Stitt is supposed to be having breakfast with the Senate Republicans on Monday, probably to chastise them for not passing a piece of this keynote legislation. So I don't think we've seen the end of that. But the real question is what is the House and Senate wanting to fight about? We've seen a lot of tax cut proposal bills, including income tax cuts, grocery tax cuts, which I think the grocery tax cut is a good idea. I mean, I do support that concept. I always have. But we've got to do that in a responsible way if they're going to be cutting everything else. Just the other day, they were discussing cutting the corporate income tax or the personal income tax completely. And we were talking about if we added up all of the proposed tax cuts we've passed so far this year alone, we would have to find $400 million in revenue. That is a huge chunk of money. And so I'm concerned that we're starting to do what we did in 2014 to set ourselves up for failure in 3 years for another teacher walkout, gross production tax fight, income tax fight, et cetera. So I think that that's actually the most terrifying aspect of this session is our fiscal irresponsibility. I think that's.
Yeah, I've been hearing about this idea of all these different tax cuts, and only one of them sounds like a good idea is the cutting the grocery sales tax thing. I just don't, I can't imagine why they would be seriously talking about cutting or ending altogether the state income tax. Like, where do they think they're going to get that money from? Like,
It's trickle down economics. They were literally arguing trickle down economics on the floor of the House. It's, hey, if we have more taxpayers, they'll pay more in taxes. And they talk about the receipts that we've had are higher than ever before. And yeah, well, times have been good recently in Oklahoma. And so, of course, they look good, but when you cut governmental funding like that, in a few years, it's gonna rear its head again.
yeah, like we're not. Whenever I think about funding for college and for higher ed, it hasn't. What is it? I can't remember the specific way to phrase it, but basically, we're paying per capita less than what we were 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember last year, 2 years ago, was it? It was either last year or 2 years ago. They were talking about how they were putting more funding into higher ed than they had been the year previous. And I was like, okay, but it doesn't like match up to where it should be now if we had kept up with how we were spending it back in like 2008, 2007. And the colleges now, they're hurting because of the pandemic. A lot of people stopped paying tuition because they decided not to go to college, or they decided to take less classes. And now you have some colleges that are, going to be firing staff and closing down certain opportunities that our students used to have, as a result of people going and paying tuition. But the state government should be picking up the pace with the spending, so therefore there isn't as much of a gap between what they did have and what they don't have currently. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. I mean, another way to really just honestly put it down and break it down even more simply than that is it used to be that the state would pick up 2/3 of the student's college expenses, and the student would be responsible for a third. That's now inverted to where the student is responsible for 2/3 and we're taking care. And that's a huge problem, especially with deflated wages. You just can't justify going on to graduate school, which oftentimes is a requirement now just to get a good job. I mean, it used to be high school, then it was college, and now it's a graduate degree, and it's a never-ending process. And so I think we've got to do something to address how we fund higher ed going into the future.
Yeah, because there's people, specifically when it comes to UCO, I'm sure other colleges are having this too, but because I go to UCO, I pay attention to what's going on with UCO. People are getting mad at the president and the higher ups for, wanting to cut funding for certain things because of the pandemic. And it's not really necessarily their fault for why they're having to make those decisions. And I wish people understood that because people didn't pay tuition, the college didn't get that much money that they were expecting to get because they have to plan out ahead. And because of the pandemic happening, there's a lot of money that they missed out on. And people shouldn't be mad at the president of the universities. They should be demanding more from the state legislature because it's their job to help out with this. And they should have been doing more to begin with, because even before the pandemic, my tuition 2016, fall of 2016 versus fall 2019 was like 30% more than what it was whenever I started. Like, it was already going up a lot. And now it's, even higher. So, that's something I talk about whenever I talk about my campaign and funding education and stuff like that, because people don't understand that if we want to keep people in Oklahoma, we have to not just make sure that there's jobs for them to get, after they graduate, we have to make sure that they want to stay here and graduate. And if you know, if I remember I had some friends go to Texas for school because some of the schools offer in-state tuition. So whatever the tuition was that people in Texas were getting, people in Oklahoma were getting. And I don't know what the tuition rates are for Texas versus Oklahoma right now, but if we can get the tuition rate lower here, then you'll have more people wanting to go to college here and stay here, and we'll have less complaints about people leaving to go to an inferior state like Texas because they have the what is it, the cloaking of being superior to Oklahoma because they fund certain things like education a little bit better than us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Is there anything else you'd like to mention or talk about?
I'm trying to think, I'm trying to think if there's been anything else that's just been momentous that's, other Democrats had some good bills that passed. Forrest Bennett got one through, Mickey Dolenz got one through, at least one. Yeah, it's been so fairly calm this session, like normal. So I am sure ask me in 2 weeks and we'll see what's on fire at that stage of the game.
Literally on fire.
What are the issues that are, showing up in your neck of the woods when you're knocking doors and talking to people? What are they asking you on the doorsteps?
Well, because it's so early in the year and because it's my first time getting to talk to them, it's not a whole lot of issues that they're, bringing up to me, but education is definitely one. Mostly about funding and keeping teachers in, the schools because, they're aware of the teacher or lack of teacher retention rate here in Oklahoma. And there was even talk of a substitute teacher shortage earlier this year. And, I talk about how whenever I'm only like this is only my 6th year out of high school, and I substitute at the high school that I used to go to school at, and only about 8 of the teachers there that I had when I was there are still there.
Wow.
So yeah, like that's and I was there all 4 years, and sure, I had a handful of teachers more than once because I was in band. So all 4 years I only had 2
Is
different
Mr.
band
Bartley
directors.
still there?
Mr. Bartley, oh, of course, yeah, he's still there. Yeah, I've subbed for him a couple of times actually. But yeah, he's still there. But yeah, like a lot of the teachers that I had are gone, and I'm not that far out of high school, but why are they gone? I know some of them retired, but that's not the bulk of why most of them gone or left. I know some of them went to another state so they can be able to teach, or they moved somewhere else in the state for, a little bit better of an opportunity. Like I think some of them were coaches, so they decided, to go get a head coaching job as opposed to an assistant coaching job or something of that nature. But, paying teachers more, especially starting out, because I emphasize the starting pay for teachers. I believe it's 34,000 now since 2018. But I mean, sure, as a single person in Oklahoma, that might be an okay wage, but if you're wanting a family, it's not a good. Like that's poverty for sure. And depending on the size of the family, even if it's just 4 people, I'm pretty sure you're not going to be.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this debate the other day because we were talking about freezing ad valorem taxes on property owners on fixed incomes that are 65 and older. We were having that exact debate about, well, are we kind of cutting off our nose to spite our face by doing this? How much are we going to lose in taxes going to public schools, et cetera?
Yeah, and I talk about that because I remember someone was complaining. I've heard this is like online stuff, but I've seen people complain about uh schools not hiring. There's someone specifically talking about Shawnee. They were saying that they don't hire people who graduated from Shawnee High School or Shawnee to be teachers. And I
Well,
started thinking, I was like, so what?
I said you proved that wrong.
Well, true. Like I thought about it and I was like, okay, well, I know I'm there and I graduated from there recently. There's someone else that I graduated with who I know they're not necessarily working as a teacher, but they work there with the kids as something. I can't remember the name of the position. It's something new that they didn't have whenever I was there. But that person's a year younger than me, but graduated. And then who else? There's like maybe one other person I think that's like a recent graduate that also works within Shawnee Public Schools. But first of all, they do hire people who graduated from Shawnee, but also you have to think about it. If you decide to become a teacher and you want to make a living as a teacher, is staying in Oklahoma really the best thing for you after you graduate? And a lot of people decide, no, it's not. So they leave if they get an education degree, just like they leave if they've already been a teacher here for 10 or 15 years and they go to Texas or some other state that's going to pay them more. So that's not really an issue of the school district not hiring former graduates. It's if someone is going into education as a former graduate of Shawnee, they're going to probably leave the state. Or if someone does think about becoming a teacher, they decide not to go through with that and decide to major in something else or go into some other profession that's going to make them more money. So, teacher pay is the way that you're going to be able to get more people to want to be teachers and stay in the districts. And even if they're not necessarily graduates of Shawnee, I'd like to have more teachers who live in the district and are part of the community. And how do you do that? You pay teachers more, so therefore they're incentivized to want to move into the community because they have the money to be able to purchase a house or something of that nature and move. Because there's plenty of teachers I know that commute at least a good 40 minutes to an hour from Del City, Midwest City, Oklahoma City, other places like that, and aren't even thinking about buying a house or moving to Shawnee because that's an expense within itself. And then also they don't make enough money to possibly put a down payment on a new house or anything like that. So those are things I feel like people don't necessarily think about whenever they think about, hiring of teachers or why people don't do XYZ thing whenever they're teachers or whatever. But yeah, let's see. I don't even remember what it was you asked me. You were asking about what are people saying on the doors and stuff. But yeah, that's something I've heard people complain about is education and funding and stuff like that. That's the bulk of what I've heard people talk about on the doors, especially after they hear that I'm a substitute teacher. They want to talk about education. But I'm sure there's going to be more things eventually when I start knocking more doors and once it gets closer to the election. Because I was told by people that most people at this point, for two reasons, they're probably not going to have a lot to say because A, first time they're meeting me probably, and then B, it's so far away from the election, they're not thinking about much of anything.
Yeah.
But, it's still good to make contact with them. And, once you make contact with them again, they'll probably have something, or it'll be close to the election that, of course, they'll have something that they want to say. So, yeah.
Well, anything else, Gregory?
That's all I can think of, I think.
Episodes of the Green Corn Rebellion Show are sponsored by Oklahoma Progress Now. Oklahoma Progress Now is a 501c4 organization focused on building progressive power in Oklahoma. Their primary efforts are on developing progressive content for a 21st century audience, coalition, and capacity building across progressive organizations and causes, and working to see elected leaders who are more responsive to their constituents and the needs of the many. Areas of focus include progressive messaging and communications, coalition building and resource sharing, and focused progressive policy goals. You can check out their Twitch live streams, and they go live on Facebook at noon, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Please support this organization. It's a really great organization. It's just getting started here in Oklahoma. Thank you. Now enjoy the rest of the video.
Yeah. What kind of music are you listening to lately, or were you listening to podcasts? Anything?
Yeah, listen to Lex Friedman's podcast right now, Artificial Intelligence, and they're talking about self-assembling space robots. So that's been fun. I'm reading a book on scale and how it affects everything.
Scale?
Scale,
Like as in like size?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you scale data, when you scale physics, those sorts of things. So those are my boring but fun for me books and podcasts that I've been into.
That's
How about you?
I mean, as far as music goes, I've been listening to a lot of Alanis Morissette and Public Enemy and a lot of old like 80s, early 90s rap music.
Have you watched the Alanis Morissette documentary on HBO?
I have, yeah. That was really interesting. I mean, it was mostly just about the Jagged Little Pill era tour. So it wasn't, I expected it to be more than just about that, but it was still pretty interesting. And I've also been the thing of how I ended up getting into a lot of listening to 80s rap music lately is because of the samples. I started looking up the different samples that are used in those songs, because a lot of those instrumentals were like just samples upon samples of different songs. And I realized there's one sample of, what is it called again? Funky Drummer by James Brown. There's this drum loop in the middle of that song. That's a very, very common drum loop that was sampled in like tons of rap songs back in the day, including some pop songs too, like Alanis Morissette. This is how it happened. Head Over Feet by Alanis Morissette has the sample in it, and then there's like 20,000 different Public Enemy songs that have it in there. They sampled it a whole lot. So I started going down that rabbit hole, and then that's what ended up with me like getting into listening to a lot of 80s rap music. So I've kind of been there lately. Not so much metal lately, though for some reason, I say for some reason, I know the reason, I've been listening to Slayer, and that was kind of unexpected because I never really liked very much Slayer before. I always found them to be really boring. But there's a Public Enemy song from like 1988, yeah, that the two samples and the instrumental is two samples. It's Angel of Death by Slayer and Funky Drummer by James Brown. And listening to that made me want to go listen to the Slayer song. And I just started listening to the whole album. And I like pretty much every song on what was it? Rain and Blood album. Yeah. So, but that's what I've been listening to. In terms of like podcasts and stuff, the Majority Report's the one I listen to pretty much 5 days a week if I can, which I usually am able to, but that's pretty much it. And then doing my own show and yeah.
Staying busy.
Oh yeah, too busy. Almost, I don't know how I'm even doing things sometimes. I'm like, oh, I did that. How come I didn't do this? No, okay. It's just never a break.
I can understand.